Hear that? That's your gut. Now, would you really trust that same gut to make important decisions for your business? Well, you shouldn't. That's what SurveyMonkey is for. SurveyMonkey can help give you insight from real people that you need to make those big decisions with confidence. And AI from SurveyMonkey makes that faster and easier than ever before. It allows you to build a survey in seconds with just a simple prompt. You can even do it right from your phone. Advanced analysis tools are also powered by AI and are there when the responses pour in to help you dig deep, find patterns, and surface trends quickly. So give SurveyMonkey a try and give your gut a break. Shh. Try it for yourself at surveymonkey.com/human-AI.
What's up, you guys? You're listening to The Black Hour, real true crimes, real stories, and new episodes drop every weekend, every Monday and Thursday. And you follow The Black Hour, don't miss any episodes, okay? And if you haven't watched part 1 yet, make sure to watch that first, then come back to this one. Alright, let's continue the case. This is part 2. The girl who floated away. That September, Ed, Ruth's husband, came up with a strange, desperate idea. He placed a small classified ad in the Eagle Beacon newspaper. It read, "Poet, tell me what I owe you. RSF." It was a risky move. But it worked. Reporters quickly picked up on the name, The Poet. And from that moment on, the men who had tormented Ruth now had a name. A name he liked. Because he started using it himself. His next message to Ed appeared in the classifieds again. To RSF, the price of my service to stay alive / can now be settled at 5. Still, no names. No details. Just creepy riddles and fear. For the poet, this wasn't a crime. It was a game. He called Ruth the 7th and hardest to find, which sent Wichita into a panic. Could he be the BTK strangler? In October, the Eagle Beacon made a chilling reveal. The poet had been secretly sending them taunting letters for 6 months. One read, "If any had a brain, no one would have pain, good or evil. My secret shall not be known. I unnoticed go my way. I may just prosper for one day." And then, he warned the police. Make sure you don't confuse the executioners again. He was mocking them. Mocking everyone. The paper released a new composite sketch. And within hours, over 25 people called in. They thought they had seen him. Knew him. Maybe even talked to him. For a brief moment, Ruth's terrifying story overshadowed even BTK in the headlines. Police doubled down. They went through every record, every past kidnapping, every stabbing, every possible lead. They even placed undercover officers around Ruth while she shopped. They wired her with hidden microphones. Still, nothing. And then things got worse. The poet started showing up again. In person. One morning, Ruth opened her front door and found a letter waiting on the porch. That night, strange banging sounds echoed from their garage. The letter read, AF******** Ed up childhood causes anger and hate. Players of games are forced to wait. It wasn't just haunting anymore. It was personal. Out of leads, the police turned to an unconventional method, hypnosis. They brought in Dr. Donald Schrag, a psychologist known for working on the BTK case. Ruth agreed to 2 sessions. She said it was calming, at first. But then, during the sessions, she became agitated. I want out of the car. I want out of the car, she screamed. She was reliving the kidnapping, the trauma, the terror. But still, no useful details emerged. Dr. Schrag gave his assessment. This man has serious emotional and mental issues. He may have had psychiatric treatment, maybe even been institutionalized. But make no mistake, he's highly intelligent. The poet wasn't done. And neither was the fear. What began as a headline was now something darker, a shadow that followed Ruth everywhere. By the time the calendar turned to 1980, Ruth Finley had survived 2 years of something no one should ever endure, the long, slow torment of being haunted. But this wasn't over. Not even closed Lieutenant Bernie Drowitzky, the detective who had walked every painful mile with Ruth and her husband Ed, was promoted. It was a well-earned move to the department's Vice and Organized Crime Division. But it left Ruth's case in the hands of a new captain. Captain Mike Hill. He was broad-shouldered, dark-haired, and all business. A no-nonsense cop with a record of long hours and hard work. He'd been involved in the investigation into the BTK Strangler. But unlike Drowitzky, Hill didn't know Ruth and Ed personally. And that meant he came in skeptical. At first, Captain Hill considered the unthinkable: could Ruth or Ed be behind this? But that question didn't last long. The physical evidence, including the angle and depth of Ruth's stab wounds, made it clear this wasn't self-inflicted. And the Ed Finley everyone in the department knew. He wasn't capable of hurting the woman he loved. But someone else was. And that someone was watching. Closely. Just days after the department reassigned the case, a new letter arrived for Captain Hill. And it began with a poetic gut punch. There once was a captain who had an asshole for a heart. The poet, yes, he was still out there. Still watching. Still writing. Christmas Eve came. And with it, silence. But it was the wrong kind of silence. The Finleys' phone lines had been cut again. It was the second time. That chilling little act of sabotage prompted the phone company, Southwestern Bell, to bury their new line underground. Still, Ruth didn't feel safe. So she and Ed had their back gate rigged with an alarm system. Captain Hill installed a surveillance camera facing their backyard, and detectives monitored the feed 24 hours a day, from the Finleys' own dining room. Ruth, ever the kind hostess, felt guilty that these officers had to sit and stare at monitors all weekend, though, as it turned out, they were getting $1,200 in overtime every weekend. She brought them desserts. She read aloud the poet's deranged letters, though it gave her splitting headaches every time. And then came January 25th. Ruth got a call at work, from him. The poet told her he'd left her a surprise in the office lobby. When detectives arrived, what they found chilled them: a 12-inch butcher knife, carefully wrapped in a red bandana, placed inside a phone booth just feet from Ruth's office. 2 separate witnesses reported seeing a man who matched the sketch. The poet had been right there. His accompanying message: shut your eyes and think of the 12-inch blade. Will you remember the hole it made? Dream of me and obey my commands. Think of me with a knife in my hands. The rhyming taunts were escalating, more violent, more sexual, more unhinged. By February, his letters were arriving more frequently. On the 19th, just after Valentine's Day, Ruth received what can only be described as a threat wrapped in a nightmare. Here's to you a tender Valentine. Red with blood and tied with twine. Nothing too much for a Valentine. Gone from here by whim of mind. The envelope contained a strip of red bandana. Another letter followed. I am about ready to start telling about you now. It will just be your word against mine. By now, Ed drove Ruth to and from work every day. There were no more risks. No solo trips. No vulnerable moments. The police had followed over 300 leads. Still, no suspect. No name. Nothing that stuck. So, desperate, they devised a trap. They outfitted Ruth with a bulletproof vest, and let her walk the streets of downtown Wichita like bait, flanked by up to 8 plainclothes officers. Unmarked cars roamed nearby. But the poet never showed. Detective Richard Vinroad disguised himself as a homeless man and lurked downtown for weeks, hoping the poet would circle back. Nothing. Still, the story was spreading. On the 4th of July, the National Enquirer broke the story nationwide. Their headline: "She's living a nightmare, the victim of a crazed tormentor." The story wasn't exaggerated. It didn't need to be. And the poet wasn't slowing down. In fact, he was expanding his targets. Over a 6-month span, more than 50 letters were sent to Wichita businesses, all under Ruth's name. All cruel, dangerous, or humiliating. A mortuary was told to prepare for Ruth's funeral. Utility companies were asked to cut off the Finleys' gas and electricity. The health department received a tip that Ruth was spreading STDs. A construction crew was directed to rip up the Finleys' driveway. The DMV was told Ruth's driving was hazardous and her license should be revoked. And a local florist. They got a $5 bill and instructions to deliver 1 black flower. To Ruth, she was being erased. Silenced. Humiliated. But whoever the poet was, he was just getting started. But the truth begins to twist. The letters, the stalkings, the stabbings, all lead to a discovery no one, not even Ruth, could have seen coming. As the calendar flipped into the new year, the police were desperate for a break. Weeks had turned into months, and the torment Ruth Finley was facing didn't just continue, it escalated. So, the Wichita police got creative. In a move right out of a spy thriller, they installed a surveillance camera camouflaged inside a birdhouse, hoping that maybe, just maybe, they'd catch a glimpse of whoever this poet was. Day and night, that camera silently watched the Finleys' backyard. It was a long shot. But they were running out of ideas. Meanwhile, 2 officers from Vice and Narcotics were assigned a task that sounds almost too tedious to be real, combing through every single letter received by the Kansas Gas and Electric Company. Why? Because they were looking for handwriting, any envelope that resembled the scrawl of the poet. It took them 4 straight days, staring at envelope after envelope, trying to find a match. Still no match. That's when Lieutenant Drowitzky decided to call in outside help, Dr. Murray S. Myron, a renowned psycholinguist from Syracuse University. This guy was no joke. He'd worked on the Son of Sam case. And now, he was analyzing the letters from the poet. Dr. Myron didn't sugarcoat a thing. In his professional opinion, the person behind the letters was clearly and severely psychotic, virulently pathological, and schizophrenic. He warned the police that this was someone extremely dangerous, a loner, and a wily and elusive quarry. He also pointed out something chilling: the way the poet wrote, the tone, the style, the chaos in his words, it all bore an eerie resemblance to none other than BTK, the infamous Wichita serial killer. But Dr. Myron didn't think it was the same person. Still, speculation around BTK kept growing, especially when the poet made repeated references to a fox he had killed. Investigators couldn't help but think of Nancy Jo Fox, BTK's most recent known victim, murdered in December of 1977. And then came a letter with one of the darkest verses yet. Mingled with blood and tears from my stormy life. Tortured oppression needs death to end the strife. With no repentance I will be free. Locked in her grave, I will return to being me. The letter was almost poetic. Almost beautiful. If it weren't written by someone who seemed ready to kill. In early June, Ruth received a letter postmarked from Oklahoma City. That was a first. Every other letter had come from Wichita. The change in location gave Captain Hill hope. Then, a break. The Oklahoma City police got an anonymous tip about a man who looked exactly like the sketch of the poet. The man had lived in Wichita, and had even been fired from his job about 7 months earlier. After that, he disappeared, moving into a trailer west of Oklahoma City. His psychological profile. A near-perfect match. Hill was excited. This had to be their guy. They flew the suspect back to Wichita. He was put into a lineup at the Sedgwick County Courthouse. All eyes were on Ruth. But after staring at each man in the lineup, looking into their eyes, their expressions, Ruth slowly shook her head. It wasn't him. Despite the physical resemblance, Ruth was absolutely sure. And this wasn't the person who had been stalking her, terrifying her, haunting her every moment. And so, the torment continued. Now, the poet wasn't just writing. He was acting. He left an ice pick and a bottle of urine on the Finleys' porch. Then came a bag of feces. Then Molotov cocktails, shattered glass on their steps, a broken gate lock, a sliced garden hose. It didn't stop there. Their mailbox was stuffed with hair, used cigarettes, firecrackers, matches, even trash. One day, Ruth found a rock in the backyard, wrapped in a red bandana, the symbol the poet always left behind. Next to it was a pair of wire cutters. Then came the most terrifying message yet, a Christmas poem, handwritten and sinister.
Founded in 1964, Fremont Bank understands the difference 60 years can make. It's the difference found in the details. The difference between customers and trusted neighbors. The difference between preparing for the coming weeks and planning for the coming years. The difference between serving a community and serving your community. So what difference does 60 years make? All the difference in the world. Fremont Bank. Here for you. Here for good.
'Twas the night before Christmas. And all through the house, Ruth wasn't stirring. You're as quiet as a mouse. Your stocking was tight. Around your neck with care. I hope the LT would not soon be there. On Christmas night, while Ruth and Ed were trying to enjoy a quiet evening in their basement, watching TV, they heard a loud crack. They ran upstairs and saw their front wreath engulfed in flames. The fire had gotten so hot, it had cracked the window open from the pressure. Ed didn't hesitate. He grabbed a baseball bat, smashed the wreath off the wall, and stomped out the flames. Then he lost it. He stormed into the night with a pair of garden shears, yelling that he was going to kill the poet with his bare hands. But the poet was long gone. In March, he sent another threat: he would kill Ruth at the St. Patrick's Day parade. The police showed up in force. But nothing happened. Then came April Fool's Day. A pile of concrete chunks were thrown onto the Finleys' porch. Each act more bold. More chaotic. More dangerous. But somehow, no one ever saw him. No neighbor. No delivery person. Not even Ruth or Ed. The poet seemed to be a ghost. And the city of Wichita, it was holding its breath. By the time spring turned into summer in 1981, the Ruth Finley case had gone completely sideways. Hundreds of hours. Dozens of detectives. Psychologists. FBI consultants. And yet, nothing. The poet remained untouchable. So, when reporters flooded Chief Richard LeMunyon with questions, why haven't you caught him? Could he be BTK? What's wrong with Wichita? The chief did what he always did: he stayed calm. He didn't micromanage. He trusted his men. But even the most patient man has a line. That line was crossed on Friday, September 4, 1981, when Lieutenant Bernie Drowitzky walked into LeMunyon's office holding a new letter from the poet. This one didn't just threaten Ruth. It threatened Sharon LeMunyon, the chief's wife. The poet knew her car, her route home, and said he'd go after her after Ruth was dealt with. That did it. That night, Chief LeMunyon took the entire Ruth Finley case file home. And it was massive. Years of documentation, letters, surveillance notes, sketches, psychological profiles. He sat with it for an entire weekend, going over every single detail. And by Sunday night, he believed he had the answer. I know who the poet is, he told himself. It's Ruth Finley. On Friday, September 11th, LeMunyon called a secret meeting, 16 trusted officers in a windowless underground civil preparedness room beneath the Sedgwick County Courthouse. The room was designed to protect city officials during a nuclear attack. But today, it would serve a different purpose: uncovering the truth. LeMunyon didn't build suspense. He sat down, looked his men in the eye, and said plainly, "The poet is Ruth Finley herself." The room went silent. Before anyone could speak, he launched into a list of reasons, facts he believed had been overlooked in all the chaos. 1. No eyewitnesses. Despite dozens of alleged public encounters with the poet, no one ever saw him. 2. No footprints. The Finleys lived on a quiet dead-end street. Police staked it out. Neighbors were alert. Yet no one ever spotted anyone suspicious. Not once. And the park where Ruth said she sprayed her attacker with mace. Only her footprints were found. 3. No wounds. Ruth had claimed she was hit in the face with concrete. But she had no visible bruising. 4. The knife incident. Ruth was stabbed in the back, but instead of calling emergency services, she dialed the police detective bureau. Then she allegedly got back in her car and drove home, with a knife in her back. How? 5. Insider knowledge. The moment Captain Hill took over her case, the poet began writing directly to him. But only Hill, Ruth, Ed, and the detectives knew Hill was in charge. 6. The birdhouse camera. Once surveillance was placed, without public knowledge, the poet suddenly stopped leaving items in the Finleys' yard. 7. Timing. Every time the Finleys left town, the poet's letters stopped. They resumed the day the couple returned. It didn't add up. Lemunyon didn't think it was Ed either. This, he believed, was Ruth. She had fooled them all. Some officers were stunned. Drowatsky was devastated. He and his wife had become close friends with the Finleys, family close. And now he was being told Ruth was faking the entire thing. The room held its breath. No one protested, out loud. But privately, many of the detectives thought the chief had lost it. What about the experts? The handwriting analysts? The forensic psychologists? The language specialists who had sworn Ruth and the poet were different people? Lemunyon didn't care. I don't believe any of them, he said flatly. And I don't believe anything Ruth says either. He even asked Dr. Schrag, again, if it was possible that Ruth was the poet. The answer came back fast and firm, absolutely not. Still, Lemunyon was undeterred. He had the doctor's reports re-reviewed by his own physician, who agreed with the others. Physically, Ruth couldn't have stabbed herself. Not the way the wounds were inflicted. But even that wasn't enough to convince him. He wanted proof. Real proof. So on Monday, September 14th, an unprecedented surveillance operation began. For the next 2 weeks, Ruth and Ed Finley would be watched every second of the day. Around the clock. 12-hour shifts, rotating teams. At least one police cruiser. One helicopter in the air at all times. A surveillance van was parked near the Eastgate Mall, just 2 blocks from the Finleys' house. The van was outfitted with a long-range lens trained on the local mailbox. That was key. Lemunyon wanted eyes on every single letter that left the Finleys' hands. Officers were ordered to tell no one, not even their spouses. If word leaked to the press, Lemunyon said, he'd fire everyone in the room. 3 days into the operation, the first major break came. At exactly 8:30 a.m., the police helicopter tracked the Finleys' black Oldsmobile pulling into the Eastgate Mall lot. It stopped near the mailbox. Ruth leaned out from the passenger window, dropped some mail in the slot, and Ed drove off. The helicopter pilot didn't know what he'd just seen, but he radioed it in anyway. At 1:30 p.m., just before the daily pickup, a postal inspector opened the mailbox and delivered its contents straight to Drowatsky and a narcotics detective. They dumped the letters on a table. 5 envelopes caught their attention. One was a personal letter from the Finleys. 2 were bill payments, also from the Finleys. And 2 were, from the poet. One of the poet's letters was addressed to Ruth herself. The other was sent to KTV, the local news station. The message inside? Hickory, dickory, dock. The name on this face is smock. Heat the iron for the brand. Cooperate for games planned. Hickory, dickory, dock. They had seen Ruth mail the letters, and now they were holding them. It was the closest thing to a smoking gun they'd had in 2 years. But Chief LeMunion remained cautious. What if someone else mailed the letters after Ruth and Ed left, he asked. What if someone slipped in behind them? They still needed more. But now, they had momentum. The end was near. Saturday, September 26th. The Finleys once again pulled up to the Eastgate Mall mailbox at exactly 4:15 p.m. Detectives had been waiting. Cameras snapped color photographs as Ruth extended her arm from the passenger window and dropped 4 letters into the mailbox. As the Finleys drove away, an undercover police car immediately rolled up, blocking access to the box. Pretending to have engine trouble, officers opened the hood and stalled there. Meanwhile, the postal inspector was summoned. The entire process of retrieving the letters was repeated, but this time, something chilling was found. Among the 4 grouped letters, 2 bills, a personal note, and one with no return address, was another message from the poet. Its contents were brutal. No dumbass bitch will get the fucking law to get me. Police resealed the envelopes and delivered them to the Finleys as if nothing had happened. Ed, like clockwork, brought the poet letter to authorities the next morning. And then, things spiraled fast. Detectives rushed to businesses where the Finleys' payments had been sent, combing through thousands of envelopes. They were looking for matches to Ruth's handwriting. At Ruth's workplace, Southwestern Bell, detectives found more poet letters, this time, inside the employee mail drop. A suspicious co-worker tipped them off, and with permission from Ruth's boss, Joe Horvat, officers searched her desk. What they discovered changed everything. A worn-out poetry book. Torn carbon paper with handwriting that matched the poet. And a red bandana, one of the poet's infamous calling cards, wrapped in a used yellow Kleenex. It was all inside Ruth's drawer. Then came the real clincher, scraps of big chief tablet paper with the poet's handwriting, dumped carelessly in her office trash. By Monday, September 28th, police began working on search warrants for the Finley home. But there was one major problem: no hard proof. Not yet. Then, a break. Wednesday. Police Chief LeMunion and his wife Sharon returned home from a conference to find a new letter from the poet waiting in their mailbox. Postmarked from Southwestern Bell, the day before police started monitoring that lobby mailbox. Half the page had been torn off. Forensic teams ran microscopic fracture analysis. That torn half. It was an exact match to paper recovered from Ruth's trash. But that wasn't all. The stamps on all those retrieved letters, the bills Ruth and Ed had mailed. They matched the same cardboard stamp book used to send the poet's latest letter. At that point, there was no more mystery. Ruth was the poet. But one question still haunted detectives. Was Ed Finley involved too? On a quiet Thursday afternoon, as fall began settling into the streets of Kansas, Ed Finley walked through the doors of City Hall for what he thought would be another routine stop. He was there to collect yet another letter from the poet. That's what the police had been doing, handing all of the poet's creepy, anonymous letters back to the Finleys after each one was processed, but this visit was different. Ed didn't know it yet, but this day was going to break something inside him. And what he would discover would change his life forever. Ed was escorted to a small office in the Special Investigations Unit. Waiting for him inside were 2 detectives, Captain Hill, who had been working the case for a while, and a newcomer, Detective Jack Leon. Leon had been brought in for one reason: objectivity. The department was hoping that fresh eyes might see what everyone else had missed. Without much small talk, the detectives led Ed into a cramped, gray-walled interview room. They read him his rights. Ed didn't flinch. In his mind, the police were always on the right side. If they wanted to question him, he had nothing to hide. The interview began gently. They asked about his childhood, his job as an accountant, his relationship with Ruth, his wife. Ed answered calmly, directly. His life wasn't extraordinary, but he had always done things by the book. Then, they shifted the focus. The detectives walked him back through every incident tied to the poet, from Ed's hospitalization in 1977 to the most recent letter that had shown up. Hill watched Ed closely. And he believed one thing: this man was not in on it. 2 hours passed. And then, the hammer dropped. Captain Hill looked Ed straight in the eye and said, "It's coming down today. I know who the poet is." Ed's face lit up. After all the stress, the paranoia, the fear, the idea of closure felt like air after drowning. "I hope the hell you do," Ed replied, practically ready to jump out of his seat. "Let's go get him." But instead of getting up, the detectives handed him a folder. Inside were photographs, color photos of Ruth, his wife, at Eastgate Mall. She was standing beside their black Oldsmobile, mailing letters. Hill pointed at the image. "One of those is a poet letter," he said. "And we've confirmed she's mailed 5 in the past 2 weeks." Ed blinked. "You have to be kidding," he said. Hill shook his head. "I wish I was." Then came more evidence, materials discovered in Ruth's office.
Founded in 1964, Fremont Bank understands the difference 60 years can make. It's the difference between serving a family business and being dedicated to a family business as a family business. The difference between looking at spreadsheets and looking at possibilities. The difference between deposits that go into a vault and deposits that go back into your community. So what difference does 60 years make? All the difference in the world. Fremont Bank. Here for you. Here for good.
Typewritten notes, red bandana cloth, a poetry book titled Maniac and Other Poems. Ed sat frozen. And then, Hill said it. "The poet is Ruth." There was a long silence. The kind of silence that fills a man's chest like cold cement. Ed's voice cracked. "Oh my God." He said it again. Quieter. As if trying to process words that didn't make sense in his universe, Hill leaned in, softening his tone. He assured Ed that no one was angry at Ruth. This wasn't about punishment, it was about getting her help. Serious help. "I've hit you with a lot, haven't I?" Hill asked gently. "You certainly have," Ed replied, staring into nothing. His thoughts a storm. The poet is Ruth. The poet is Ruth. Hill had one more ask. "I need to eliminate you, Ed. The only way to do that is for you to take a polygraph." Ed nodded slowly. "That's fair." But questions still circled his mind. If Ruth wrote the letters, what about the stabbing? The kidnapping? The late-night phone calls? Could she really be behind all of it? They got in the car. Hill drove him to the Kansas Bureau of Investigation on East 3rd Street. Ed didn't ask for much. Just one stop along the way, to grab a pack of cigarettes. A tiny slice of normalcy before walking into the strangest moment of his life. The polygraph lasted nearly an hour. He passed. Easily. He was cleared. But the hardest part wasn't over yet. Hill gathered a team of detectives and headed to the Finley home, with Ed right beside them. As they searched, more damning evidence surfaced: poetry books, red cloth, handwritten drafts, rulers, pens, letters. It was undeniable. Ruth Finley was the poet. Ed didn't cry. He didn't shout. He didn't collapse. He was relieved. If it had all been her, if it was just her mind, and not some shadowy predator out to kill them, then at least, she was safe. But the question remains, what drives a person to live a double life so convincingly, that even their spouse of decades doesn't see it coming? At 5 o'clock that evening, just hours after her husband had learned the truth, Ruth Finley stepped into the lobby of Southwestern Bell. Lieutenant Droitsky was waiting for her. He smiled, polite as ever, and told Ruth that the police needed her help, again. Would she be willing to come down to the station to look at mugshots? It was a request she'd heard countless times before. And like always, Ruth agreed. She had no idea what was waiting for her behind those doors. They brought Ruth into the same interview room where Ed had sat earlier that day. Captain Hill was there again, Detective Leon beside him. Hill greeted her with warmth. Calm. Reassuring. And then, without much ceremony, he read her rights. Ruth blinked. She didn't understand. Why was he reading her rights? She wasn't a suspect. She was a victim. But still, she nodded. And when Hill asked her to walk through her life story, her childhood, her job, her marriage, everything that had happened with the poet, she obliged, just as Ed had. But halfway through her story, Hill stopped her. Ruth, he said, either you or Ed could have done every one of these things. Ruth didn't flinch. We've talked about that, she replied. Calm. Measured. We've said, you know, they probably suspect one of us. That's when everything changed. Hill leaned forward and placed a stack of letters on the table. Real poet letters. The ones that had haunted the department, and the Finleys, for years. Did you write any of these? He asked. Ruth's answer was soft, but firm. No. Hill didn't blink. What if I told you I could prove that you did? His voice had gone cold. Ruth flinched. Mike. She said, startled by the sudden shift. But Hill didn't stop. Do you want to keep playing your game? Because you've got a problem, lady. Ruth looked around, confused. When did I mail those letters? She asked, pleading. Hill slid a photo across the table. A surveillance image of her arm stretched out from the car, slipping letters into a mailbox. Ruth stared at it. Speechless. I'm the poet, she whispered to herself. Something inside her unraveled. Her shoulders sagged. Her eyes went distant. A vague image floated into her mind, herself, in the basement, writing something. But it wasn't a memory. It was like watching a stranger. Hill's tone softened again. He listed the items they had pulled from her office trash, the letters, the bandana, the poetry books. Ruthie, why? He asked gently. I'm not mad. I just want to know why. Ruth's voice trembled. No. Do you need help? Yes. Her mind was spinning. Images came and went, flashes of things she couldn't place. Had she really done all of this? If Hill said so, it had to be true. But it didn't feel like her. It felt like someone else. A shadow version of herself. Hill kept going. Why did you fake the abduction? Why stab yourself? Why all of it? Ruth's answers were hollow. I don't know. He asked about the assault in Fort Scott, when she was 16. When someone had branded her with flat irons. Had that been a lie, too? Through tears, Ruth insisted it was real. I'm not mad at you, Hill said again. I just want an explanation. I don't have one. And then, the dam broke. Ruth began admitting to everything. The poet letters. The knife in the phone booth. The ice pick. The feces. The Molotov cocktail gas. Even the kidnapping. She admitted she'd taken a bus that day, left her sweater and shoes by the river, hoping the police would find them. But here's the thing, even as she confessed, Ruth said she didn't actually remember doing any of it. She wasn't lying. She was guessing. Giving the most logical explanations to satisfy a man she was terrified to disappoint. She believed she must have done it, because the police said she had. And in Ruth's world, you did not disobey authority. Hill asked one more time. Did you mean to hurt yourself as badly as you did? I don't know. He asked how long it took her to write the letters. She didn't know. He asked how she felt. I wish I was dead, she said quietly. Hill dropped her head to the table so quickly, it made a thud. Right now it feels like the world is ending, he told her. But it's not. Ruth, do you think you need to see a doctor now? I must be crazy. No. You're not crazy. You're sick. You have a disease, just like any other disease in the body. Hill stepped out of the room. When he returned, he wasn't alone. He brought in Dr. Schrag, the psychologist who had once hypnotized Ruth years before. As soon as she saw him, Ruth dropped her head again. "Hi, gal," Schrag said gently. "Would you look at me? What would you like to do now?" Her voice was flat. "Go home. Just die." Schrag knelt beside her. "If you let someone help you, Ruth, in a few months you'll be back at work. You'll live a normal, happy life." She didn't respond right away. Then she said something that broke everyone's heart in that room. "I wish you knew the good side of me, because I really am a good person." Schrag smiled, gently. "I know that, Ruth." Ruth looked up. "I tried to figure out what was wrong," she said. "But I couldn't stop it." Ruth Finley had no criminal record. She had no motive. And now, she had no memory. What had started as a chilling stalker case was unraveling into something far more disturbing, an internal war raging inside one woman's mind. But just what was wrong with Ruth? Was this a psychological break? A dissociative fugue? A buried trauma re-emerging after decades? The truth was coming. But it wouldn't be easy to face. At exactly 9 p.m. that night, the door to Ruth's home opened quietly. Outside, a squad car waited under the dull glow of the street lamp. Ruth, pale and expressionless, stepped into the back seat, with Ed seated beside her. He gently reached for her hand, but she didn't respond. She just stared forward. Silent. Empty. The vehicle pulled away and headed toward St. Joseph's Hospital, where Ruth was to be placed under 24-hour psychiatric watch. She wasn't being arrested, at least, not in the traditional sense. But make no mistake. Ruth was no longer free. She had become, quite literally, a prisoner of her own mind. Back at the precinct, Wichita authorities were locked in an intense debate. The question on the table, should Ruth Finley be prosecuted? Her case, the poet, as the press had dubbed it, had cost the city over $370,000. And while some detectives still saw her as a deeply troubled victim crying out for help in the most twisted way imaginable, others, especially Chief LeMunyan, saw something else. To them, she wasn't just sick. She was deceptive. Dangerous. And maybe even criminal. But when the Sedgwick County District Attorney reviewed Ruth's full psychological profile, he reached a controversial but final decision: there would be no criminal charges. According to him, Ruth's bizarre behavior wasn't driven by malice, it was rooted in deep, unresolved psychological trauma. Then came Friday, October 26, 1981. That morning, Ruth faced the public for the first time since her stunning confession. And when reporters asked how she was feeling, her voice cracked, and she whispered something that chilled everyone in the room. "I think I may have died, and gone to hell," she said softly. "I think I'm coming back, though." It was the first time she'd admitted how far gone she really was, and yet also hinted at the faintest possibility of recovery. A week later, Ruth began twice-weekly therapy under the care of Dr. Andrew T. Pickens, a 38-year-old psychiatrist with a thick black mustache and a reputation for being relentless. To him, therapy was detective work. Every word, every silence, every slip of the tongue, it was all evidence. A mystery to be unraveled. Dr. Pickens believed that if Ruth was going to get better, she'd have to travel back. Way back, into her childhood. Ruth had grown up in the Great Depression, on a quiet stretch of farmland in Richards, Missouri. At first, she described it as simple, poor, but loving. Normal, she said. But her therapy sessions started revealing a different picture. Ruth began writing long, detailed poems as part of her treatment, using verse to express things she couldn't yet say aloud. These poems were dark. Violent. and hauntingly vivid. One recurring image stood out, a red bandana. It appeared over and over again, and Ruth didn't understand why it disturbed her so much. Dr. Pickens did. He pushed her. Gently, then harder. And finally, after 3 long months, the truth came out. When Ruth was still a little girl, small enough to be helpless, a man who lived nearby, a supposed family friend, did something unspeakable. He tied Ruth up using a red bandana. Then he led her to his barn. And there, behind closed doors, he shoved the same red bandana into her mouth. And sexually assaulted her. That red piece of cloth, buried in Ruth's memory for decades, had never gone away. It lived deep inside her. Not just as a memory, but as a wound. A secret she carried alone for years, until it finally tore its way back into the light. It wasn't just trauma. It was the origin story of the poet. And Ruth was finally beginning to understand it. For nearly a full year, Ruth endured unspeakable abuse at the hands of her neighbor. It didn't stop, not after 1 visit, not after 2. It became a pattern. A nightmare loop she couldn't wake up from. And what made it worse was that the very people who were supposed to protect her, her parents, punished her whenever she tried to escape. If she cried, if she ran, if she showed fear, she was scolded. Sometimes beaten. Every time, blamed. Ruth started to believe she deserved it. In her child's mind, she wasn't a victim. She was a bad girl. Damaged. Evil. The men told her it was their little secret, and if she ever spoke out, he'd kill her. And so, she stayed silent.
Founded in 1964, Fremont Bank understands the difference 60 years can make. It's the difference found in the details. The difference between customers and trusted neighbors. The difference between preparing for the coming weeks and planning for the coming years. The difference between serving a community and serving your community. So what difference does 60 years make? All the difference in the world. Fremont Bank. Here for you. Here for good.
To survive the horror, Ruth's mind did something extraordinary and heartbreaking. During the assaults, she'd mentally drift away. She called it floating off to heaven. It was like her spirit would leave her body and watch everything happen from above, as if it were happening to someone else. It wasn't so bad, she once said, if it wasn't me. This psychological defense is something trauma specialists know all too well. It's called dissociation, a way the brain protects itself by disconnecting from the horror it's experiencing. It's not rare among children who survive deep trauma, but it always comes with a cost. For Ruth, the cost was forgetting. Locking it all away in a dark corner of her mind, for 43 years. But nothing stays buried forever. In her 50s, everything began to unravel. The stress of her husband Ed's sudden hospitalization. The constant media coverage of the BTK strangler. The growing sense of dread she couldn't explain. It was like a storm inside her. And then, the memories came crashing back. It was too much. Too sudden. And so her mind created something new, the poet. But this wasn't like split personality disorder. The poet wasn't some different person with a name and voice. It was more like an altered version of Ruth, a different state of mind, one that she didn't even remember being in once she returned to her normal self. Her therapist, Dr. Pickens, believed this was Ruth's final coping mechanism. A way to survive a second time, this time, from the trauma of remembering. Over the next 7 years, Ruth underwent deep, intensive therapy. And they were brutal years. There were tears, breakdowns, setbacks. But Ruth kept showing up. So did her husband, Ed. So did her children. Her siblings. Even when the world didn't understand her, the people who loved her never walked away. Not everyone was convinced, of course. Some people thought she was faking it. Some said she was lying. One even said, maybe something happened to her as a child, but not like she claims. But Ruth stayed the course. Eventually, she reached a point where she didn't want to hide anymore. She went on local television and told her story, raw, honest, unfiltered. She wanted others who had suffered in silence to know they weren't alone. And the response? Overwhelming. Letters, emails, phone calls, all from survivors, thanking her. Ruth had spent so long carrying shame. But now, finally, she felt something else. Relief. She had done it. She had faced the shadows and walked through the fire. And even though she would never again write poetry, she had written something far more powerful. Her truth. So guys, if you felt something today, don't keep it to yourself. Follow the Black Hour, rate it, and share it with just one person. Search the name. The Black Hour. I'll see you next weekend, with more stories they don't want told. And if you've lived through something strange, something horrifying, send your story to the email in the description. theblackhourpodcast01@gmail.com. Who knows? The next episode might be yours, and keep it the Black Hour. Thanks for listening. Bye guys.
Hear that? That's your gut. Now, would you really trust that same gut to make important decisions for your business? Well, you shouldn't. That's what SurveyMonkey is for. SurveyMonkey can help give you insight from real people that you need to make those big decisions with confidence. And AI from SurveyMonkey makes that faster and easier than ever before. It allows you to build a survey in seconds with just a simple prompt. You can even do it right from your phone. Advanced analysis tools are also powered by AI and are there when the responses pour in to help you dig deep, find patterns, and surface trends quickly. So give SurveyMonkey a try and give your gut a break. Shh. Try it for yourself at surveymonkey.com/human-AI.